Hello everyone, I'm John Higgins, contributing writer to Film and TV Now, and I'm delighted to welcome one and all to this second of these two interview specials with filmmaker and cinematographer Peter Stein ASC. In the first interview, we discussed his documentary, Out of Exile, which focuses on the amazing photographic legacy of his father, Fred Stein, who captured iconic images of some of the most influential figures of the 20th century, including Albert Einstein. In this second interview, we'll be concentrating on the craft of cinematography and the context of filmmaking. So Peter, warm welcome to you again.
Thank you, John. It's good to be here.
Okay, so let's just go back to the very start. I mean, when did you evolve into cinematography as a career?
Well, I grew up obviously with my father, who was a photographer, and I learned photography at a very young age and used to go out with him occasionally, but he taught me how to print pictures in the darkroom. So I took a lot of pictures as I was growing up and printed them. And I won a Kodak high school photo contest. My father had a very hard life economically as a photographer, so I didn't really want to do that. And I decided, I would do anything but not be a photographer. But I was really good at photography, so I don't really understand I was a kid. So I didn't do photography. I went to school, and then I went to graduate school in sociology, because I like to work with people, and I saw the world a little differently because my parents were refugees first from Germany and then from France. And before they came here, I was born here in the United States. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do until I was 27 years old. And at 27, I realized I had a friend who was in the film business, and I went and visited the set once and was on an old Robert Downey Sr. film. He had done a great film, Putney Swope. And I saw them shooting, and I said, oh my goodness, what a great life this is. I would like to be anything in the film business. I'd love to be a grip. So I got a job as a messenger in a stock footage film company. I was 27 years old, and I was bringing rolls of film. In those days, there was film. And I was bringing rolls of film to the lab and picking them up and bringing them back. And eventually I got promoted to being an apprentice film editor. And through various reasons, because I kept seeing all these cameramen coming in. They'd been to, Oregon or California or Germany or who knows where. And they'd be coming in to see what their footage looked like on an old Moviola, which was an upright editing machine. And that was in the days before they had the flatbed editing machines, which were much faster. And I said, oh my goodness, I'd really like to do what these guys are doing. I'd like to be traveling and so on. And I thought, yeah, I could be a cameraman. But through various means, I got a job on a feature film as a boom man. And that was very cool, working on a feature film. And as a boom man, I worked with the sound man very closely. And eventually, there were two unions at the time. I don't know how in depth you want me to go, but just stop me if it's too.
Oh, no, do carry on. It's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Oh, okay. Well, in New York, there were two unions at the time. There was the IA, which was the old established union, and you couldn't get into that union. unless your father was in or you had a relative or you had some connection. And then there was NABIT, which was a union that anybody could get into. And so you had to join a union unless you were doing really, really low budget films. So I got into NABIT as a boom man. And I eventually, I stayed as a boom man for about 3 years. And eventually I was the top boom man in New York in NABIT. And NABIT was a union that did, I would say 70% of the TV commercials were done by NABIT. And very low budget features were NABIT films. So I was the top boom man. I was working on features, thousands of commercials. But at the same time, I had met a cameraman and he trained me to be his assistant on documentaries. So I was secretly, sort of, they were non-union, working as an assistant cameraman and traveling around. We were doing a show for, it's called The World of Sports Illustrated for Time Life Films. And we would travel around to various parts of the United States, shooting all these great events, the Super Bowl and the Basketball Association playoffs and skiing and bowling and whatever Sports Illustrated magazine was interested, we would do. And I was the assistant cameraman. And I really thought I could be a cameraman. So after 3 years of working as an assistant and working as a boom man, I said, I'm going to be a cinematographer. And I had met on a film I was doing, a very nice film. I met the assistant director who he and I became very good friends. And he said, you know, I'm really a director. And I said, well, I'm really a cinematographer. Those were our dreams. And he had a film he wanted to do on the American composer, Charles Ives. And he was a really good businessman, and he was a great editor. And so he said, I want you to shoot it. And I said, great, you know, for nothing, obviously. But it turned out to be a really wonderful film. It won a Peabody Award, which is a big award. And it became my reel. And in order to make that film, it was called A Good Dissonance Like a Man. In order to make that film, we put together a little reel of scenes, but without actors, just beautifully shot of the New England countryside and so on. And that's how he would show that to people. This was in 1976. And he showed it to people and was able to raise the money for his film. And I showed it to people in order to get more work as a cinematographer. And I met a couple of guys through an editor who I had worked with as an intern. And they hired me to do a documentary film that they were doing. So we were shooting both of those films, did not shoot all the time. It would be a weekend here, a week there, and so on. So I was shooting this film on Charles Ives, which was biographical, but reenactments, sort of dramatic film, along with this documentary film. And the two guys who were doing the documentary, it was a film on horses. And the East Coast of the United States horsey set. People like Andrew Mellon and Harrimans and really wealthy people. And I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in Upper Manhattan, Washington Heights, and I knew nothing about horses or the horsey set. These really wealthy people with horse farms, and we filmed you know, these great horses. But in any case, I was shooting a documentary and a narrative sort of semi-narrative film at the same time. And after that, those two films really helped my career because they became my reel, which you need to show to producers in order to get work.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so that was the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, really nice beginning. I mean, I've got to ask you because how did you get the gig for the Friday the 13th Part 2 film? And what were the memories of working on that set?
Oh, boy. I'm trying to think. I through those reels, I was able to show producers of, I don't know if they have them in Europe, but they were called after-school specials, which were films for children after school, but they were little narrative films, well-written, well-produced, half-hour films, and it was sort of the bottom of the narrative film scene and television. After that, you would get television movies, which was a big step up. And after that, you get television series. It was a whole different structure from today. There was no cable television at the time. So a television movie was a really important, big deal step in a cinematographer's career. But I got, and then feature films was a whole other category. And usually there was a progression that you would go from, you know, I mean, everybody had their own way of advancing as a cinematographer. I'm going to stop for a second because I must say there were almost no film schools in those days. I'm old enough to have been sort of pre-film school. And the film school, there were probably a couple of film schools, NYU, where I later taught for many years, in New York University, and USC. And that was about it, maybe UCLA, but almost no film schools. So I never went to film school, and many, if not most, cinematographers did not go to film schools. There were certainly film schools in Europe, but in the United States, it was much less common. So I had shot a number of these really lovely after-school specials, and I was nominated for a couple of Emmy Awards for two of the after-school specials I shot. And I'm not exactly sure how I met Steve Miner, who's probably Stephen Miner now. He became a big director in Hollywood, especially in television. But I met him, and he, I showed him my reel, and he said, you know, are you interested in? I'm working on this film. He was an editor, but he was now, I think, an associate producer on this film, Friday the 13th. And I said, sure. You know, it was any kind of work was work for me. I was learning, and so they had a cameraman, a cinematographer who was shooting the film, but they needed some second unit work here and there. And I said, oh, I'd love to do that. So I shot a few things for them. And in fact, I shot, I think it was the last scene of the first Friday the 13th, where, and I don't really remember it very well, because I'm not particularly into horror films. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the last scene where the Betsy Palmer is in the hospital and she wakes up.
Adrian, that was Adrian King. I think it's the scene in the hospital.
Adrian King, correct.
And I think it's the so you were talking about the hospital scene, not the actual lake scene.
Right, not the actual lake scene.
Okay, yes, so no, because that's
scene.
just to clarify, without spoilers for anybody watching, there's a climactic scene with Adrian King sort of talking about her experience. So Friday the 13th fans, that just clarifies it. Peter did not shoot the the lake scene, so it's actually the hospital scene. But that's always a fun thing because it cuts between them. But it's yeah.
Yes, so I did shoot that scene, and quite a bit other background stuff that they, and sometimes I was second camera on the set. So then when and that was a big hit, Friday the 13th. It wasn't called Part 1, it was the only Friday the 13th at the time. So that was a big hit, and they Paramount decided to do Part 2. And Steve Miner, who was either the producer, or he was the associate producer on Part 1, he was going to direct Part 2. And he and I had a nice relationship, and he asked me if I would like to shoot it, because the cameraman that they had wasn't, he stopped shooting. I don't know why, but he decided not to be a cinematographer anymore. He retired. So I was very happy to do it, and that's how I got the job.
Okay, and I mean, you've worked also in other horror films. I mean, the one that I'm always fascinated by, which I did read from your filmography, is the film Chud, which, for those of you who don't know, is cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers, which was a big VHS film. I remember going into the VHS store, and of course, the 1989 version of Stephen King's Pet Sematary, directed by Mary Lambert. So my question to you, this is a sideline question, but what would you say are the benefits for cinematographers in both the indie and studio situation? Where do you feel the positives are for each context?
I missed the question.
Okay, so when you work in indie films and you're working in a studio context, if you make a studio film like Friday the 13th Part 2 for Paramount, but then you do when you do an indie film like Chud, for example, what benefits are there for cinematographers in both an indie situation and a studio situation?
Well, in fact, the studio had a release agreement for Friday the 13th, but it was not a studio picture. It was done independently, non-union. I was NABIT, but Paramount had an agreement with IATSE, which is the big, older, established union. By the way, NABIT doesn't exist anymore. IATSE swallowed them up. So Friday the 13th was in fact an independent film. It was a low budget film, Friday the 13th Part 2 that I did. Eventually, I would assume they became full union, and I should say that Part 2 that I shot, all the members were NABIT members. Almost all the crew were NABIT members, not strictly non-union. But we really weren't protected. We really didn't have. I mean, we shot in Connecticut in a camp, and the crew lived in the bunks of the camp. So it was pretty rough. It was not like you would think a real Paramount film. They didn't treat us particularly well, but it was pretty wild. We would, for a lot of the film, our call time was 7 p.m. and we would wrap it around 7 a.m. And at 7 a.m. we would start drinking and partying, and because we were all living in this camp. It was a camp for adults, or young adults, I should say, and it was a lot of fun. But it started to get very cold, and first of all, I was the cinematographer. They gave me my own private bunk, so. Eventually it started getting cold, and everybody got together and we said, we want hotel rooms. This is not working. And they gave us hotel rooms. But it was just working at night, and in the morning as the sun comes up, you know, the just partying in the morning was very unusual. Let me say that.
Yeah.
But we were all away, which is a really wonderful thing about working in films. Is it's a whole society, especially if you're away. If you're not, let's say, shooting in New York or LA, but you're shooting in another country or another city, you've got a new little society, which is, it's very interesting. And an interesting thing about it is what my mentor when I was a boom man said to me, because we did a lot of films out of town. He said, one of the interesting things about working on films is you could be looked at as a real, you know, a dope or a schlemiel, as they would say in New York, on one film, and on another film, it's a whole new thing. You could be a hero. You could be like a big deal. So, you know, but it's nice to establish yourself with your reputation. But the film business is big enough and small enough so that you can have a whole new group of people on each film. Mm-hmm. So, but then there, I did work on quite a few studio films, and that's different. It's a much more you're taken care of better. There are requirements every day, which is the right way to work, but the studio would get reports every day as to where you were for that day's work. And if there were problems, or if there were problems in the dailies, because they were always screened in Los Angeles. In those days, New York didn't have a really big film industry for feature films, which is what I was interested in doing. But it was usually from LA. You'd get notes from the studio every day. I did one film, it was called Necessary Roughness, and it was a football film. And it was a sort of smaller studio film for Paramount also. And Mace Neufeld was the executive producer on the film. And he had done a lot of films for Paramount. He had done The Hunt for Red October and Patriot Games and many big films. And it was an interesting situation because the director, Stan Dragati, who was a director from TV commercials, he knew really what he wanted from the look of the film. And as a cinematographer, I worked for the director. And I mean, the producer was really important, but my job was to implement the director's vision and perhaps bring something more to it. And so he said to me, what I would like for all the interiors that we shoot is for you to smoke the set, put atmosphere into the set. And what that does when you put strong lights is you see shafts of light because of the smoke. You see that. So he said, I want all the interiors to have that. And we did that, and I think really beautifully and quite successfully. Well, Mace Neufeld, who was this big producer, he did not like smoke. And he would say to me on the set, he came over to me one day, and Stan Dragati, the director, was standing there, and Mace came over to me and he said, Peter, you know, I really like your work, and the studio is really happy with your work, but the studio does not want you to use smoke anymore. Don't use smoke. I said, oh, Mace, you really have to talk to Stan, the director, about that. He said, just, you know, you want to work for Paramount, don't use smoke. He left, and Stan came over to me and said, what was he telling you? what did he say something about the smoke? And I said, yeah, he doesn't want me to use smoke. He said, Paramount, he says, you are using smoke. I said, fine. I mean, those two, being a cinematographer is it's a very political game. But on that film, oh gosh, I forgot his name, the actor.
Or it was I know the one you're talking about. He was in Quantum Leap. Was he in Quantum
No,
Leap?
not him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was great. He was great. Oh gosh, I have such a bad memory now.
Scott Bakula? Was it Scott Bakula?
Scott Bakula, yeah, that's not the actor I was thinking of.
Oh, okay.
Scott Bakula was a great guy. I did another movie with him, a television movie with him and John Ritter. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh yeah, I remember John Ritter. He was on. He actually did the American version of a British comedy show called Man About the House, or Robin's Nest. So it was an export that we did. But I remember and I remember they showed some bloopers of him doing. He was actually quite funny on set when he did. There was a whole. Dick Clark used to do these blooper shows in America, and we used to get them. Yes. But there's some very funny moments where. I think there was a thing where he was going like, would you care for some shrimp? He sort of went to the camera and stuff like that. But I do remember him very well,
See, I actually have a list here. Let me, oh no, I don't have the, oh gosh. Anyway, so on this particular film, Necessary Roughness, it was this old crusty actor who played the coach. And or he was the assistant coach, and it's an Italian name, and he's standing outside his trailer, getting sun, and Mace and Stan, the producer and the director, said to me, go over, and now he's about 65 years old at the time, the actor. And he's an established, well-known actor, and I'll think of his name. And they said to me, "Look, I was pretty young, and these guys were established director and producer. And they said, look at him, he's getting all his sun. He's going to be darker in the later scenes than he is in the earlier scenes." And I said, yeah. And they said, well, go over and tell him not to do that. They knew he was going to give me shit. I mean, they knew it. The two of them had said, let's get Stein. Watch what happens. So they made me go over to him, and I said, being out in the sun, why don't you wear a hat? And he looked at me and he said, get the hell out of here. And he was a nice guy, and he just said, give me a break, get the hell out of here. And I could see the two of them were over in the corner laughing. They had set me up because they knew this guy was not going to take anything from this young kid who was a director of photography. Now, usually the director of photography gets a lot of respect, and the actors listen because they know you can make them look good or you can make them look bad. Although I don't think any DP or director of photography. And it's interesting, it's called DP in the United States and DOP in the UK and in Europe. But there are, many times when I've had to speak to actors, and usually it's not a problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, got just two more questions for you. I found it really fascinating hearing your stories. Let's talk about the aspect of your other career, which is teaching cinematography. I mean, because you didn't go to film school, and here you are in film school teaching people how to be cameramen. I mean, what are the key things you focus students on first, and what do you find are the key mistakes that people starting out on their learning curve tend to make at that start?
Well, when I was teaching, I taught for 13 years. I was a professor in the graduate film school at NYU, New York University. which is a great film school, famous film school. Some of my students, for instance, James Franco was one of my students, and a really wonderful director, Kari Joji Fukunaga, who just did the last Bond film, was one of my students. And oh, what's her name? Who just won the Academy Award for Best, Chloe Zhao, for Best Director and Best Film, was my student. So it's a great film school. So I taught cinematography, and they had, you know, they were directing. It's mainly a directing focused school, but in order to be a student there, you had to take the whole course, as opposed to, for instance, the AFI, American Film Institute. You can focus mainly on one aspect of filmmaking business. At NYU, you had to take everything, all the courses. And what I mainly focused on was lighting, which is different today. It's one of the main reasons, and the cameras are, of course, digital cameras now, although NYU still teaches film. When I was teaching, it was pretty much exclusively film cameras. And we shot on film, and then we would do a scene one day, and we would look at it the next day, the next week. It was one day a week for the students. We'd look at it the next week and critique it and see what we did right and wrong. But I would set up scenes for them, and I would light the scenes and explain to them what I was doing. And the lighting, so today I'm sure it's quite different, although the theories of lighting are the same. Today you can achieve that with minimal lighting. In fact, you can shoot with no lighting. The cameras and the lenses are so fast. And then in post-production, you can change things radically, if not almost completely. But I would teach lighting and just the theory of how to make a scene look realistic. So it was mood. So if you're shooting a mystery scene or horror scene or a comedy scene, the same scene in the same room, it would be lit completely differently to get the mood, to put the audience in the right perspective. And then the other thing, so that's really the main thing as a cinematographer that I would teach. And every week I would teach a different aspect of lighting: hard light, soft light, shadows, you know, different things like that, different effects, fire effects or television effects or whatever it is. But what you would do with lights, where you would put your key light, your fill light, your backlight, if you use those at all. Today, in order to make a scene look real and proper for that, today you can just light it, and you know what you see is really more or less what you get. And so people who are not particularly accomplished in lighting can do pretty well with today's equipment. So that's really what we would do. But placing the camera and your field of view and what you see, and you know, is the camera up here or is it down here, makes all the difference in the world. And are you moving the camera or not moving the camera, or moving the actors or not moving the actors? You know, certainly a lot of that has to do with the directors, but and it depends on the director's strengths. A lot of directors come to directing because they're great writers or good writers, or because they were actors, or because they were producers, they have the money, or who knows why. But directors need more or less input from their cinematographer. So someone like Hitchcock would say, I want the camera put over here, with a 50mm lens and don't move it. And that's what the DP or DOP would do. And the lighting generally is left up to the cinematographer, but that depends on the strength of the director. If the director comes from being a cinematographer, which some directors do, they would know more about lighting. Or if they're painters, I mean, you know, so a cinematographer's job is really to figure out who your director is. Now, some cinematographers work with the same director for many films, but at least for the first film is, what do they know? How much do they want me to do? And how much influence can I have?
Mm-hmm.
You know, not only that, but on the set, how much influence can I have? If it's, sometimes they would put me on a set with a first-time director and expect me to make sure that everything was cuttable in the editing room. Whereas a director who's, in quotes, weak, or who doesn't really know editing too well, they may forget, you know, it would be really great to have a close-up here, or to move in, you know, try to figure out a style for the film.
Mm-hmm. Final question, Peter, this has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, what are you most proud of about your career?
Well, I'm goodness, that's a hard thing to say. I met my wife on a film. That's a good thing to say. I think I accomplished for myself the artistry that I was hoping to achieve, and I worked with some really nice people, and I worked with some people who were not great, let me put it that way, directors, because those are the people who really affected the cinematographer. And I think I was able to navigate the experience and the films quite well, and I was able to express myself quite well through my work, which is, you know, it's fulfilling to see your work up on the screen in a movie theater. It's a thrill, and I'm you know, I wouldn't change it. I'm really quite happy with the way my career went.
Okay.
Also, I just let me end with teaching and giving back and cinematography, because I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be a teacher at NYU without having had a good career and being in the ASC. That was a really rewarding aspect of my career as a cinematographer, was being able to share what knowledge I had with the new generation of students.
Okay. Well, Peter, I think you've shared an incredible amount of anecdotes and experience. I mean, I've been thrilled to hear your stories. I mean, Strandagotti, he directed a really great comedy back in the late 70s called Love at First Bite, which was a Dracula spoof with George Hamilton, which is very funny. And Mason Affeld worked on things like The Omen and stuff like that. So it's very good per se. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time and insights. Basically, Out of Exile, the photography of Fred Stein, recently played as part of the online Paris International Film Festival. It's well worth watching. For info about the 2023 edition, please go to www.parisintlfest.com. For more articles and interviews and reviews, you can go to www.filmandtvnow.com, and you can see this and other interviews I've conducted by my official YouTube channel, John Higgins Film Review. Thank you once again, Peter, and thank you one and all for watching.
Thank you.